Hi everyone. I am so sorry that we are a little bit slow to start. We had a little bit of technical difficulties getting the live up and going, but it's going. I will introduce myself first. If you don't know me, my name is Alaina Swope. I am a young progressive Democrat running for state representative here in Muskingum and Guernsey counties, which is Ohio's 97th House District. I'm running on a progressive platform that's centered around economic growth and education reform, a living wage, and green energy jobs, and that's all we're focused on tonight is what a Green New Deal could look like in the state of Ohio. So if you are unfamiliar with what a Green New Deal is, it is a kind of an umbrella term for a bunch of different areas in which we can bring green energy and green jobs and just a greener, better, more sustainable future for all of us. So we can find that in legislation. We can find that in direct action. We can find that in municipalities just kind of deciding that they're going to invest in green energy. We'll talk about all of that tonight. A little bit more about me. I was born and raised in Zanesville, Ohio, and I love this area, and I believe that we deserve better representation because for decades our representatives have not shown up for us, and it shows. We're facing a housing crisis. We're facing an economic crisis. We don't have jobs. We don't have affordable housing. We don't have affordable health care. We don't have the opportunities that we need to prosper in this area. So that's why I'm running. I want to make this place a better place to live, and I want to be the representative that we deserve. So I want to get right into it because we have a lot of ground to cover tonight. So I want to first introduce Nathan and Victoria, who are two climate activists with Sunrise Movement Columbus, and they're both involved in other areas. So I'm going to go ahead and bring them on, give them a warm welcome. Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on here. This is such an exciting night. So I would love for if you two would tell everyone a little bit about yourselves and how you got involved, and then we'll kind of get going.
Awesome. I'll go first. So like Alaina said, my name is Victoria Abugalium. I'm a PhD student at Ohio State. I study environmental social science. And I'm, oh, sorry, Siri just went off. I'm in the Sunrise Columbus hub. And I got involved because I have been kind of like soft activist in Ohio for a while regarding like climate justice, and I wanted to get more involved and actually like affect change because I think a lot of people in this area kind of feel powerless when it comes to actually being able to change our energy system and fight against climate change because it's such a huge problem. So that's why I got involved, and that's kind of what drives me. But more like technically, I got involved after I went to a Green New Deal protest, and Sunrise was there. And then I like just followed up on the website. There's like this hub finder, which we're going to talk about later, that I found the Sunrise chapter through, and they immediately invited me to start organizing with them. And I recently, just actually on Sunday, took on the hub coordinator role, but I also do a lot of direct action and like community and political outreach.
And my name is Nathan Wright. I'm an undergraduate student at OSU, and I'm studying chemical engineering. I came to be active very similarly to Victoria. I've always been involved in environmentalism, but I've never really felt like I could do anything substantial. But midway into my freshman year last year, I heard about the local Sunrise Hub in Columbus, and I had a brief conversation over text with someone, and eventually they convinced me to come to a meeting. Since then, I've helped lead the recruitment effort, recruitment lead for the hub, and I hope to bring people like me into the movement.
That's awesome. So before we start to get into your slides, what I want to see in my community is some more activism and some more organizing. And I would like to see a Sunrise Hub start in Zanesville. And I would like to engage with young people and young adults and people of any age, but to really put the work in to fight for a better future. So can you guys talk to me about what your North Star is in terms of continuing the organizing and continuing the activism, because it's a really exhausting thing to maintain, but it's necessary to maintain, and it's easy to burn out. So how do you guys deal with that, and what kind of keeps you going?
Do you want to take this first?
Sure. Yeah, I really live to be part of community, and I love to feel like I'm surrounded by people that care about me and want a better future for all of us. And Sunrise offers that to me, I think, and it's inspiring just to see like the sheer amount of young people that are working on this, and it's a lot of work, like hard work, like you said, and it does get like stressful at times because it's such hard work. And we're going up against like the fossil fuel industry, all of these big industrial actors, and it's a youth movement. So I think that's kind of what drives me, is just like showing up in those spaces and seeing just the sheer amount of youth that care so much about this, because this is the future that we're creating for ourselves. And I want to work hard to make sure that I have a future to see through. What about you, Nathan?
Yeah, and I feel really similarly. Obviously having a hub support me, and a tight-knit activistic community, sorry, that's not a word, but kind of support me, obviously keeps me involved. But I think it's good to have a place where you can continue to do good, that keeps you moving, keeps you focused and trying to do good, focused on an everyday basis, right? So having something to focus on is always good for me. But having a hub support me and help me do good keeps me in it.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful to have like specific actions that we're focused on.
Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about what specific actions you guys are focused on?
Yeah, we were gonna get into it in our slides more, but right now, oh, sorry.
Whatever you want. Add whatever you want.
Yeah,
I think we have some pictures that go with this. So.
Yeah, but I would just say like we're trying to grow our hub a lot right now. That's what we're focusing on for the like short-term future, and that looks a lot like I think during COVID, it's interesting to see how recruitment efforts have changed, because we can't really be present physically in places and be talking with people. So it's been a lot of online stuff lately.
Yeah, and it's hard to feel that same sense of community building and just community in general when I'm sitting at my desk in my apartment alone, and like it would be really fun to be kind of in a room together, kind of feeding off of each other's energy.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it like necessitates more scheduled times to just like hang out, which is also hard because there's so many Zoom meetings. I'm like all zoomed out.
We've also had to get like so creative in this whole process. We've kind of had to like rethink how organizing, is carried out, right? So we have to find events that are both engaging but also like very accessible to people in this time. Obviously nothing in person, everything online. But we also have to find a way that emphasizes the skills of our hub. Yeah, so it's been an interesting process.
Yeah, and just thinking about a town hall like this and how, like, if we were not in the middle of a global pandemic, this would have been a really cool thing to have, like, in a local auditorium and really invite a big audience and have that kind of energy. But, at the same time, this gives us a lot of opportunity to reach people kind of where they are, without, assuming they have the transportation to get somewhere. And I don't know how easy it would have been. I'm kind of talking tonight to people from all over the state, and getting all of those people in one room would also be hard. So it has its pros and cons, like everything.
Yeah, to kind of go off of that, one of the things we've kind of thought about is bringing a lot of the hubs around Ohio together, which is something we obviously couldn't do in person anyway, right? So it's caused us to maybe change the way we look at things, but also pursue other things that have ended up being pretty good. We've learned that we are more powerful together as a bunch of united Ohio hubs, which has been helpful. So it hasn't been all bad organizing online medicine.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I definitely think, oh, sorry.
Okay, that's just another problem with doing everything online. That's tiny delay. You can go ahead, Victoria.
I was just going to say, I definitely think it's also given us time to focus on things that we had maybe like forgotten about, or like not had the capacity to do when everything was in person, because like any activist, grassroots activist knows, I'm sure you resonate with this too, Alaina, it's a lot of work to distribute, and sometimes things fall through the cracks. So switching platforms has been a little helpful with that too.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Let's keep this going. Let's go ahead and get into your slides. I'll share those really quick. Okay, so we'll go back. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna get the layout.
It's like musical chairs.
I know. This is a fun game. I hope you're all having as much fun as I am. Okay, there we go.
Cool. Yeah, so part of why we're here today is to help Alaina and Zanesville potentially organize for the Green New Deal with Sunrise. And Nathan's going to talk about kind of like who we are, and we're just going to go back and forth talking about what Sunrise represents and what our goals are, how they align with, rural Ohio, and what youth who are interested in this work can do to get involved without all of the figuring out of like starting a new organization. That's one of the great things about Sunrise, is that it is a national organization. And so starting a hub is really easy.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Sunrise's mission. Now, if I had to summarize Sunrise's mission in one sentence, I'd say that we are building an army of young people to create millions of good jobs and stop climate change in the process. But I think this mission statement could definitely be better defined. Sunrise aims for immediate and decisive action to help transform the economy and energy system, a transformation to mitigate and prevent the effects of climate change. However, not just any transformations, going to do. We need to make a sustainable and economically just future for all, which includes lifting up people that have traditionally been left behind. We have all the technological means to do what needs to be done. Public opinion is on our side. And with a powerful grassroots movement, like a fully charged Sunrise, a future can be built for more than just a few people. Finally, the Sunrise movement emphasizes not looking left or looking right, but forward in completing this mission.
Yes, thank you so much. And like how do we envision climate activism? Sunrise, like to achieve Sunrise's mission, we have to organize a lot. And because it's a youth-led movement, it involves a lot of on-the-ground work that, like we were just talking about, kind of has been suppressed in the last couple months. But our main way that we affect change is to vote in leaders that actually champion things that we care about, that move us toward a just future in climate. And that is, for us, the Green New Deal. And one of our climate champions is Alaina Swope. And so we've seen that change is possible in this way, to vote in new leaders with Sunrise. Like the recent win with Jamal Bowman in New York shows us that, like landslide victories from what were underdogs are possible. So we believe that through people power, and political alignment, we can achieve massive government-led transformation of our society to put an end to climate change. And that's going to take a lot of work, but we also anchor on the principles of climate, environmental, and racial justice to accomplish that mission. So, for example, right now, a lot of Sunrise's national efforts are amplifying the movement for Black lives, because we know that there's no climate justice without racial justice. And when we support communities of color and marginalized people that have been systematically exposed to environmental pollutants, we can finally begin to imagine and create like a healthier, more equitable and just world. So those who have been left behind by our political system and national culture and discourse, like Nathan was saying, need a voice. And that rings true in Black neighborhoods all across the USA, in urban and rural America. But even more generally, rural America has been left behind in a lot of ways, like lack of access to needed public resources and economic opportunities. And through the Green New Deal, we can set this on the right path. We can get a lot of youth involved with sustained engagement to use our voice to pressure those already in power to feel the urgency of this crisis, and we can elect Green New Deal champions like Alaina into position of power. So we need that political alignment to establish a shared agenda for the society we want to live in, and our climate activism works when we create political power by electing real leaders who will stand up for their communities and a Green New Deal, and when we imagine a world that looks nothing like our own, one where we stop climate change by transforming our whole economy. And if you go to the next slide, I can talk about the kind of actual things that we do. So we do a lot of phone banking. This picture is our hub doing a phone bank for the People's Bailout. And then the next image is a photo of a bunch of Sunrisers doing a sit-in. One of the most famous ones Sunrise has done is like the Nancy Pelosi sit-in. We do art builds, canvassing, which has taken a back seat right now. So we do more phone banking, and we also do trainings for new Sunrisers. And phone banking has been especially important right now. They're really easy and fun. They're not scary, even though some people definitely, I feel you on like not wanting to do it, but it is one of the most effective things that we do to get people elected. And we're currently organizing a phone bank with Alaina for the near future, and working on some new trainings for our hub to help new members find their role with us. So that's kind of what we do to affect change. Awesome. And then I think Nathan's going to talk about the Green New Deal.
Yeah, so why a Green New Deal? Why don't we just push green legislation? I think we have other people speaking about this, at length later in the town hall. But our economy right now favors corporations over people and profits over the environment. We also face a climate crisis that disproportionately affects the working class, communities of color, as well as other marginalized groups. Simple green legislation will yield small, short-term benefits for a relatively small amount of people without actually addressing the real issues that plague our nation. A Green New Deal, if executed, will leave no stone unturned. It would create good-paying union jobs while also increasing the quality of life in a healthy climate. I feel that a lot of people, Ohio residents specifically, have held a job or know someone who has in the fossil fuel industry and might be tentative to embrace alternative energy. But there are countless examples of these energy jobs not going away, but actually improving in quality as they transition to solar or wind. I think Victoria has a local success story of how solar has had a positive economic outcome in a community it was built in, one of the goals of this Green New Deal.
Yeah, so this story is not in the 97th district, but it's right next door in Newcomerstown, which is a small town north of Zanesville. And in the last 5 years, they built 2 huge solar fields with over 3,200 panels that'll save them hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. And I just wanted to bring this up because I thought it was a really cool story about what like a transformation of energy can look like in rural Ohio. they were able to install these solar fields with no upfront costs, and residents are going to pocket savings across the board for years to come, since these panels also power the village's water treatment plant. And I'll share some links to like the story. But what's really cool about this story is that their mayor did this after already transitioning their local school to solar. So they saw the benefits and wanted to scale up. And it's such forward thinking in our own state. And when we think about like how this might be possible in other areas in rural Ohio, there's a huge possibility to transform our energy system. The 97th district has, or Zanesville alone, has like at least 20,000 more residents than newcomers towns. So there's a possibility for long-term high-paying jobs to sustain the local economy, and an elimination of kind of the boom and bust that we see in like Appalachia in Ohio, that leaves entire communities behind once the resources have been depleted from the earth. So that's why we need a Green New Deal so badly, to lift up our communities, to make sure that everyone has a sustaining wage and clean water and air, as well as other tenets of the Green New Deal like healthcare, housing, and access to nature. But yeah, it's super possible, and I'm really excited about it.
All right, so I think Alaina kind of hinted that maybe her district was ready for maybe a hub. So I'm going to kind of briefly walk through the process of starting.
I believe we're live now. If you're just tuning in, I'm not sure how this is going to work since I cut it off and then restarted it, but the audio, I guess, muted. So we're trying this again, hoping it works. I'm not sure what happened there. Kathy, let's go ahead and get into your slides.
Okay.
So you can head out when you need to.
Okay, great. So my part of this Green New Deal Town Hall is to talk about what a Green New Deal could possibly look like nationally, but also all of this applies as well to Ohio. So next slide. So, oh wow, that kind of made the little title there really small. But so first, though, I want to talk about what is the Green New Deal. So it's not a bill, it's not a law, it's a resolution. It was introduced in February of 2019 by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And at the same time, the Senate version of that resolution was introduced by Ed Markey in the Senate. So it's a resolution that says it's the duty of the federal government to do several things to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions, create millions of good, high-paying jobs, invest in infrastructure and industry, and secure clean air and water, climate resiliency, and healthy food, and to do all of this through a 10-year national mobilization. So that's the substance of the Green New Deal, the umbrella resolution. And so then the question becomes, it's an umbrella where other programs, policies, laws could be enacted under that umbrella. Okay, next slide. Okay, so who supports the Green New Deal? It has 100 House co-sponsors, 14 co-sponsors in the Senate. But in Ohio, the only co-sponsor so far is Representative Marcia Fudge from the Cleveland area. So if you're in her district, please thank her for that. For everybody else, please call your representative and both senators, including both Brown and Portman, and ask them to sign on to the Green New Deal. A resolution saying that we need to deal with climate change at the scale and speed that's required and tackle the inequality crisis in our country at the same time. That is something they all should be signed on to. Next slide. So what kind of specific policies and programs would be under the Green New Deal? I'm going to talk about some examples in 5 areas. And then I'm also going to give you examples of kind of program starts in these areas on the state and local level. So next slide. So the first area we're going to look at is infrastructure, and there's a lot of things that can be done regarding infrastructure. But it's more than just repairing, upgrading, and expanding. It is repairing, upgrading, expanding like our railways, bridges, our energy grid, our water lines, but also not just repair what's broken, but build new systems that are better, that are more equitable and more resilient, and in the process create millions of good paying jobs. So within water, we could be replacing lead pipes in cities all over the country. We all know about Flint, Michigan, but there's about 3,000 other cities across the country that have water lead levels that are that high or even higher. And we could also be doing green infrastructure to deal with storm runoff. There's increased storms and heavy rainfall events and flooding. And there are things you can do with the infrastructure, like around rivers and in your cities, to deal with that. So an example of this was in Pittsburgh, a campaign called the Clean Rivers Campaign. It was made up of unions, environmental groups, community groups, and they pushed for this green infrastructure like green spaces to absorb rainwater, to replace lead pipes, to improve roads, and they got public investments, they got money set aside to do these programs. So that was, an example of grassroots activism from the ground up that worked. Next slide. Also, one thing everyone thinks of with infrastructure is high-speed rail, and that's kind of I guess a really key program under the Green New Deal. It's what we think of if you've seen that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez video about the Green New Deal. It shows her in high-speed rail. We could build that out between cities to create a nationwide network and make affordable, quick, and safe transportation. High-speed rail has been shown to cut the need for air travel in short distance trips and medium distance trips. The long distance trips, there's still air travel. It's not like air is going to be outlawed or going to go away completely. But if you can transfer that to rail that runs entirely on electricity that is created by renewable energy, you're really cutting your carbon emissions. And then kind of the same idea within cities to build out light rail, or also to do bus rapid transit, which is sort of like making the bus experience as rail-like as you can do. So next slide. So in Cleveland, there is an example of this bus rapid transit. It's Cleveland's Health Line. And so that serves 5 million people per year. And so the way they do it is they have buses coming every 5 to 7 minutes in busy times, sort of like when you wait for a subway and during rush hour, there's more trains, they come more often. They get their own lane, they get traffic preference. You prepay your fare, so you're not like fumbling with your money when you get on. You've got covered stations with seats. You've got an elevated platform, so you're not having to climb steps to get in. It's just a lot of things to make riding the bus kind of more rail-like, more efficient, and faster. Next slide. So another area of infrastructure is our energy grid. And so we need to be upgrading our grid, developing a smart grid. As we roll out a lot more renewable energy, solar and wind, the grid is going to have to be upgraded. It needs to be, we have several different, I guess, sort of subgrids within the United States that need to be better connected. And they need to be able to handle more energy coming onto the grid and also deal with battery storage. So that will need to be done, and that will be another thing that creates a lot of jobs under the Green New Deal. And next slide. So a couple of state and local examples. In in Cincinnati, and I'm very proud to say that just last night in Columbus, we voted to put this on our ballot in November, is a program called Community Choice Aggregation. So what that does is it allows local governments, a city, a county, a township, to buy energy on behalf of all of the residents in that district and all of the businesses in that district. So that way they're pooling together all of the customers, and they can use that kind of to do a bulk purchase and bargain with utilities to get energy at a good price. And it can also be used to bargain for 100% renewable energy, which is what Cincinnati did and what Columbus is going to do. So for Cincinnati, they started this almost 10 years ago now, and for a long time they were buying what's called renewable energy certificates, which are basically like carbon offsets. So like if 100 megawatts of power was used in Cincinnati, then they would buy that much on the renewable energy market, which is okay because that's stimulating the renewable energy market, it's bringing down prices, but it's not an investment in your local community. So last year, though, Cincinnati agreed to buy power directly from a solar farm under construction in Highland County, nearby the next county over. And when the city committed to that, then that's what got the banks to say, okay, we're gonna go ahead and build this out. So the Columbus Aggregation ballot initiative, they plan to do the same thing, but they want to have 100% renewable by 2022, and they want it straight out of the gate to be local, to have local solar and wind developed right here in Ohio, much of it in central Ohio. They are looking at it specifically as workforce development, as creating a lot of jobs, and as kickstarting a renewable energy industry in central Ohio. So that's just amazing news that this is going to be on our ballot in Ohio in November, and I urge everybody to vote for this. So next slide. So then a second area where we could do a lot of programs under the Green New Deal is with buildings in particular. So in most cities, buildings are the top source of carbon emissions. In Columbus, they're 58% of carbon emissions. Other cities, it's more or less, but usually like the majority of carbon emissions in most cities comes from buildings, those great big commercial buildings, apartments, homes, all of it. So if we had a national effort to retrofit homes, businesses, city buildings, we could create a lot of good paying jobs just through that. And the other thing is it would save the residents and the owners of these buildings lots of money. So people really love energy efficiency because it saves money. Who doesn't want to do that? But at the same time, it lowers emissions and moves us to climate stability. So if we had state, national energy efficiency standards, that would help create some of those jobs and had public investment to fund those jobs. So that's, making existing buildings more, where there's like you deal with the insulation, you deal with what's called the building envelope, or, sealing the windows, things that keep energy from escaping that building, and so that it needs less and uses less. So yeah, and next slide. So an example of this, we have two examples. New York City, as you know, as you can imagine, has a lot of buildings. There, it's responsible for 70% of carbon emissions. So they passed a law, the Climate Mobilization Act, that requires buildings over 25,000 square feet, of which they have 50,000 of those. Those buildings, the owners must lower emissions 40% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And they're expecting it to create 8,000 jobs per year. But at the same time, you don't want them spending a lot of money and then raising rents. So there are stipulations in that legislation to keep that from happening. And then in Illinois, this Future Energy Jobs Act also helped low-income families to get community solar. It provides job training, and so formerly incarcerated people are installing a lot of that solar. They have efficiency standards that are going to create jobs, and they're going to cut $4 billion in costs in energy costs. So, that's just a win-win-win all the way around. And that's what we're seeing repeatedly with these Green New Deal programs, is it's just a convergence of a win for lots of people. Okay, the next area to look at is manufacturing, and this is the third of 5. So, as we know, in Ohio, manufacturing helped create the middle class, but between corporate-led globalization and bad trade deals, a lot of jobs have been shipped overseas. The middle class has gradually been decimated for the last 40 years, but the climate crisis is an opportunity to reinvigorate the middle class by creating a new generation of jobs. So next slide. Yeah, so one policy that helps to do that is a buy clean policy. So basically that says if you're a government, when you spend money on things like paper or steel for bridges or insulation, just basically anything governments buy in bulk, that requires that those items be manufactured in facilities that lower their carbon emissions, that have good salaries for their workers, and good union jobs that treat their workers well, and that's the only way. You can only spend taxpayer money on companies and goods that meet those requirements. So next slide. So an example of that is in California, there's a buy clean policy. So they actually require 800 large industrial facilities to report and track and report their carbon emissions so that the state can see, okay, who's emitting what, and then the state has to take these supplier emissions into account. And next slide. So also a similar policy would be buy local, and so that would encourage local manufacturing. You could create a whole industry of wind turbines and solar panels that are manufactured here in Ohio and locally. There's a large company called First Solar up in the in the Toledo area. And there's another company called Melink, and I might be mispronouncing that, in the Cincinnati area. And they make solar panels and install a lot of these solar fields. And so if we can be investing our tax money in those, companies that are right here at home, then that spurs significant local job growth. And then we can require also that these companies offer high wages and good working conditions. So a fourth kind of program under the Green New Deal could be a climate conservation corps. So in the New Deal back in the 30s, they had a civilian conservation corps, and this would be similar to that, but directly addressing the climate crisis, but also employing hundreds of thousands of people. And next slide. So a climate conservation corps could manage our nation's forests and deal with fire safety. They could plant trees. We know trees are a big carbon sink and would help take carbon out of the atmosphere. We need reforestation. But they would also manage the land to reduce fire risks and help shield the community. So this one's especially important out west, but also would need to be done in Ohio. Next one. Or they could work with wetlands. So in Ohio, 90% of our wetlands, Ohio used to have a lot of wetlands, and like up in the northwest area of the state, just lots and lots of wetlands. And so in the 19th century and 20th century, most of those were drained. There's, like, if you go to Ohio State University, there's a drainage hall of fame, and that's what that's about, is draining all these wetlands to turn that into farmland. So the wetlands we have left, we need to take care of them, to manage them, to keep them so they thrive, because we know that wetlands filter water, they absorb heavy rainwater, they trap climate pollution, and they can buffer communities from storms and floods, and help with our climate resiliency. So this is something a climate conservation corps could do. And next slide. So the third area they could work in is cleaning up hazardous waste. So lots of communities live near a hazardous waste site, such as an abandoned mine, an industrial facility, or some sort of brownfield. And this especially affects low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, because there's a lot of environmental injustice in where these sorts of toxic facilities are located. They're usually put into communities where people have less political power. So if we hire and train workers to clean this up, that will directly help those communities. Next slide. So, and finally is climate-friendly farming. So we know that large-scale industrial agriculture contributes to carbon pollution, releases a lot of carbon emissions, but that climate-friendly farms can sequester carbon. So, putting animals out to pasture, for example, if the manure is spread out, they sort of naturally spread out the manure, and that helps mix into the soil and hold carbon in, versus having one of those manure lagoons that's just a toxic brew, usually with a lot of drug waste and things like that in there, that it's unclear even what to do with that, and that ends up getting spread out, but it's too much. But this sort of climate-friendly farming can also help the farmer by having more productive cropland, boost economic security, and make the farms more climate resilient. So next slide. So throughout the Green New Deal, if you actually read it, it's about 14 pages. It's not that long. But there's a lot of language about requiring projects to pay family sustaining wages, to hire locally, to offer training, to sign labor agreements. and giving priority to projects that reduce climate pollution and pollution of all sorts, that give communities their own self-determination about what projects they think are important to do in those areas, and to benefit low-income and communities of color. And next slide. So this, I was talking about this before the other live stream ended, but so I'm the chair of Ready for 100, which is a campaign of the Sierra Club to ask communities to commit to 100% renewable energy. So these are the communities that have made this commitment, which is something a lot of people don't realize, that we have 166 cities, including 4 in Ohio, 13 counties, 8 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. So these commitments cover 100 million people, or 1 in 3 in the United States. So we are making a lot of headway on climate by working from the local level on up. And also, this is where most of the carbon emissions come from, is cities. So this is going to take a big bite out of climate change. And so those are some of my sources for this presentation. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer any of those. And I am going to have to duck off here, though, in just a second, because I have another meeting at 8 that I have to be at.
That was so educational. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Yeah, hope that was helpful.
It was so helpful. My mother just texted me and told me how much she learned. So
oh, good. Yeah, I had to kind of fly through that, but
yeah,
you know, that'll give you, maybe when you're looking at candidate plans on the environment, like that gives you a framework for evaluating these candidate plans.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Kathy, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us. Give you a little round of applause here. And you enjoy your next meeting, okay?
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you guys for sticking in with us. We're a little bit over time, but we still have 2 really exciting panelists up. So I'm going to introduce Jane Harf, who is the director of Green Energy Ohio, and she's going to talk to us about what Green Energy Ohio does and her role as the director, and we'll continue this going with talking about a Green New Deal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to get here and so I'm where you can all see me. I really appreciate being invited and having Green Energy Ohio as part of this conversation, because we've been around for 20 years now, working on clean energy issues for the state, in the state of Ohio, with the state of Ohio, and for Ohio citizens. And I think we have a role to play in the whole conversation about where we go next and the Green New Deal and climate change. So thank you so much for doing this for your future constituents.
Yeah, I think this kind of educational, almost like seminar, town hall can do a lot of good for this community. So absolutely. I'm going to start bringing up your slides.
Well, thank you. That's good.
We'll just kind of get into it. Okay.
Good. Well, yeah, most of them I think are going to be situated so that the writing is on the other side. So that's good. However you want to do it, Alaina, really. Green Energy, who we are. Excuse me. Green Energy Ohio is a statewide nonprofit organization, and you can read this, dedicated to promoting sustainable energy policies, technologies, and practices. Next slide, please. So what we do, how we do this, we promote these our goals through energy education. We want to educate Ohioans on the availability, the use, and benefits of renewable resources and energy conservation and efficiency. We represent a very diverse membership, and if you want to move to the next slide, why don't we make that bigger now in the way you had it so people could maybe see it. Can you do that? There you go. You don't need to see all their logos. So I'm sorry, the words are kind of small here, but we have individual members. Obviously, many people in Ohio are supportive of our mission and the organization. We have volunteers, we have donors. We also have business members, not only businesses who are engaged in the clean energy economy. And Kathy mentioned Malink, which is there on the slide. And Malink has been one of our longtime members and biggest supporters, but also companies that are pursuing green energy solutions to their processes, whatever they might be. And an example of that on the slide there is Gojo. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Gojo, but Gojo makes Purell. So they are absolutely in the thick of things right now with the pandemic. And they have a huge solar array at their manufacturing and distribution center in Worcester, Ohio. So their main product, their economic sector is not clean energy, but they believe in clean energy. They believe in renewable power and what it can bring to them, reductions in cost, as well as the commitment to environmental benefits. And that's really important. And more companies are finding that position. We also work with academic programs and institutes around the state. We have so many good universities. Alaina, I believe you went to Miami. I actually teach a course on energy and climate at Miami. And you went to Miami, right?
Yes, I went to Miami. Sorry, no one can hear me if I'm here. Let's do.
Okay. Yes. Well, anyway, I teach a course on energy and climate at Miami, and it's through the Institute for the Environment and Sustainability. So we partner with all of those, as many as possible across the state. And then we also work with government entities, communities. Kathy talked about the local governments that are really on the cutting edge right now of committing to renewable energy and cutting their carbon footprint. We work with them and with other nonprofits. You know, the idea, I like to say it takes a village, and this is really one of the issues where you do need a significant coalition in order to make it work. Next slide. Next slide just says, whoops, that's the same slide. There it is. Next slide basically says what I already indicated, which is that we've been in business as an organization for 20 years, and we're very proud of that. And there's been a lot of change, a lot of progress, but there's still so much to be done. Next slide. Well, we also, when we heard from the Sunrise folks, they talked a little bit about having to move events online. We're all having to do that. It's a challenge, but it's also exciting. It's also an opportunity. And the one, Green Energy Ohio has put together a virtual conversation series called Clean Energy in the Age of Coronavirus. And we've had 3 so far. The first was with journalists. It was the media perspective. The second was with 2 gentlemen in the clean energy industry. Well, actually, we've only had, no, and then we had the nonprofit, forgot that. We had someone from Solar United Neighbors and someone from Rural Action. And then this Thursday is our academic conversation with a professor from Ohio University and the sustainability director at Kent State University. So we're really trying to see, you know, what this current situation means to clean energy and to look at it from a variety of dimensions. Next slide, please. A couple of years ago, I started in this position in 2017, and I went around the state and talked to our members and supporters, and I said, okay, we've been here for now 17 years or at the time. What do you want from us? Well, how do you see the organization growing? And one of the things we heard frequently was climate change, as you might expect. Clean energy is a critical component of addressing the climate challenge, and to not talk about it separately would really be a missed opportunity. One of the things we have done is to host screenings of the film, The Human Element. It's a documentary by James Balog, who also did Chasing Ice. Many of you may have seen Chasing Ice. It's great, but I think The Human Element is really amazing. It's a very powerful experience. If you have not seen it, you can get it now online. We like to host the screenings so that at the end we can have a panel discussion. We did that in Athens, in Columbus, in Dayton, and we had 3 more scheduled for this spring that had to be canceled as a result of the shutdown. We're hoping to resume those screenings as soon as possible, or perhaps even to move them online. He talks about wildfires, he talks about hurricanes, he talks about air pollution, and he talks about coal mining. And but it's through the lens of individuals who are living with these issues. He goes in that picture, he goes on the fire line with CAL FIRE in California to fight a wildfire. He goes to places where there is flooding, and it's one of the interesting things is his grandfather was a coal miner, and he goes back to where his grandfather lived and actually died in a mining accident, and talks about that, and talks with the people in that community who are putting solar panels on reclaimed mine land. So I would encourage you all to try to take advantage of that and see that when you can. Next slide. The other program that we have so far is our Climate Change Book Club. And every month in our newsletter, we choose a book, we select a book. A couple of times we've done a film. We did Paris to Pittsburgh, and we did Before the Flood, which is the film by Leonardo DiCaprio. But we generally choose a book, and we ask people to read the book and comment on it through our Facebook Climate Change Club. And so I would encourage you to do that if you're interested. And some of them are classics that we've done. We've done some Rachel Carson's Silent Spring is a classic.
I just want to go back for a second.
Sure.
I've read one of your, I can't remember what it's called, but I know it was one of your books. It was the Cli-Fi. What's that one called? The climate fiction.
Oh, about Barbara Kingsolver.
Yeah, Kingsolver.
Right. Mm-hmm. Flight behavior. Yes.
I read that book. I took a Cli-Fi class in college at Miami.
Really?
Yeah, and it was part of a capstone, but we read that book as a part of it, and it opened my eyes to just sci-fi as a genre, but climate fiction is so interesting. So I would recommend Flight Behavior by Barbara Kingsolver more. It really makes you think.
And there is as you said, there's a whole genre now of fiction that weaves in the climate message as part of the storyline, and it's really it's really exciting to see. A lot of the other books are there. We don't choose academic books necessarily, but we choose books that we think will have a broader appeal. And we're also thinking about trying to find a way to do a more interactive book club. Again, something online where people could get together and talk about the book. So that's a great idea. And then we're looking at other forms of programming on climate. I'm in the middle of a 10-day course, the Al Gore Climate Reality Project training. And it's usually done in person. This is the first time they've done it online. And there's some 10,000 people around the world who are taking this training, and it's really yeah, it's great. So we are going to continue to grow our climate program at Green Energy Ohio. Next slide. I think it's important that we all realize that Ohioans support renewable energy and energy efficiency, and some of these numbers. And I'll actually send a PDF to Alaina, because PDFs tend to be not quite as big a document. And if she wanted to send it out afterwards or post it somewhere, so you could read the fine print. But I think the message here is that Ohioans consistently show a high level of support, whether it comes to being willing to pay a little more, whether it comes to thinking that the future is in clean energy. And so I think for elected officials, it's hard for me to understand how candidates or elected officials can believe that they're representing their constituency if they aren't supporting these things. And that's why it's so great to see young people, young professionals like Alaina running for office, because we need to have that. We need to have people who are connected with their constituents in this way. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little, and again, I apologize for the small print. I'm going to talk a little bit about Clean Ohio, Ohio clean energy jobs. And I will read a couple of these just to make sure you hear them, and then hopefully you can take a look at them later on. In 2019, at the end of 2019, Ohio had approximately 114,000 jobs in the clean energy sector. And of course, employment is a huge part of the Green New Deal. It had grown by 1,900 throughout the year. It is growing faster. It was growing faster than the overall state employment had been growing. And it was 12 times higher than employment in the fossil fuel sector in Ohio. Now, unfortunately, COVID came along and the shutdown impacted that. I think it's indicated that we lost about 20,000 clean energy jobs as a result of the shutdown. But now some of those were furloughs. I know our Green Energy Ohio business members, the solar installers, some of them kept going, but others didn't. Others took a pause, and so they had to furlough some of their workers. They're back at work now. Many of them did online sales and sort of virtual conversations with prospective clients. But you also had the financial impacts of the shutdown. People might be less inclined to make an investment in a solar array at their home right now until they are a little more stable financially. And the same thing is true with businesses. Companies that are considering that may hesitate until there is some more certainty about where we are all going. I do believe, and I have seen forecasts that say that the clean energy sector will be among the first and the fastest to recover, because it is the direction has already begun. We are on a trajectory that I think is going to continue to increase. So hopefully that will be true. Next slide, please. And this slide just shows the distribution of those jobs throughout the state. As you might expect, there's a concentration in the major metropolitan areas. Toledo, Kathy mentioned the fact that Toledo has long been a leader in solar panel manufacturing. Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. But I think you can also see that there's almost no place in the state where there aren't clean energy jobs to some degree. I mean, this is definitely not localized, or if you are living anywhere in Ohio, pretty much you could find work in the clean energy economy. Next slide, please. This shows clean energy jobs by sector. Energy efficiency is by far the largest employer in Ohio within the clean energy sector. And you know, they say energy efficiency is the kilowatt you don't use is the cheapest and the cleanest and the safest. And oftentimes when you go to get a solar array put on your home, the first thing that the reputable installer will say is get an energy audit. Find out how much you use and how much you can reduce what you use before you invest in a solar system. So energy efficiency, whether it be at the residential level, at the commercial level, at the industrial level, finding ways to reduce the amount of energy we use is critically important. And there are a lot of jobs associated with that. That's followed by advanced transportation and then renewable energy in terms of jobs in Ohio. Next slide, please. This, again, I hope you'll get a chance to look at it. It's just a deeper dive into the sectors. And within each of those sectors, it shows where the jobs are. The renewable energy sector, that's the one on the second level to the right as you're looking at the slide. Clearly, the solar industry in Ohio is where most of the jobs are. And that is, I think, something that will continue. Next slide. So this shows what we call the value chain, or sometimes the supply chain. Manufacturing and construction are where most of the jobs are. Ohio has a long history of manufacturing. We have a very strong manufacturing base, so it makes sense that we would be a vital link in the clean energy supply chain. There are companies in Ohio, and I always use Talon products as an example. They're in Northeast Ohio, and they're a manufacturer that had been in business for some time, but they saw an opportunity, and they did a little shift in what their product line was, and they began to manufacture racking for solar panels. And it has been a very successful and productive and enterprise for them. So there are a lot of companies like that who, whatever it is that they do, they can find a way. I was contacted by a company not too long ago called American Friction, and they're in Ohio, but they do braking. And there is a need for braking technology on wind turbines. And they were looking to get more involved in the industry because they saw it as an opportunity. Even Timken, huge, long time company in Canton. Timken does ball bearings for wind turbines, huge ball bearings for wind turbines. So there is a lot of opportunity there. And Ohio is very well situated to take advantage of it. Next slide, please. So this is, this is an interesting one. And again, I apologize that if you can't read it, but 62% of the jobs in clean energy in Ohio are small businesses. And that's defined as companies with 20 individuals or less. And that's a big deal right now. And we know that small businesses, again, are disproportionately affected by the pandemic and by the shutdown. And we want to make sure that those small businesses keep going and that we can maintain that. And the other statistic there is about veterans, that 11% of the clean energy workforce are veterans, which is higher than most industries. There have been a number of programs specifically designed. There was a Solar for Vets program that's specifically designed to train folks as they come out of the military service, who may have skills that they developed while they were in the service that could be easily transferred to working in clean energy and particularly in solar. So I think that's an important component that we need to think about who the people are who are doing the work. And the next slide is about, speaking of who the people are, it's a program that I'm very proud of and very excited about. It's called Understanding Photovoltaics, and it's a program of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. It's part of their reintegration unit. So as they prepare inmates to be released, the reintegration unit helps them with skill building and training. And Green Energy Ohio has been a partner in this program that trains inmates to be solar installers. It's a 12-week program. The students do classroom work, as well as, and this picture here is outside. Our companies have donated a lot of equipment that they can work on, and there's a waiting list to get into the classes. And within each class, I think there's generally about 20. Within each class, 2 to 3 of the students will be chosen to take the certification exam. And they have passed at an extraordinary rate. They do extremely well on the exam and get their certification. And then when they are released, we help them to find employment. To me, it's a really important thing that we can do. Again, the industry can serve a segment of the community that wants to be part of society and wants to be part of something new and exciting. And I've been up to the correctional facility several times and met with them and given presentations. And they're actually thinking of expanding it to the women's facility as well, which I think would be great, because these jobs aren't, just for men at all. There are many women, not as many as we'd like, but there are many women in the clean energy industry. So we actually gave them an award last year in 2019. Gave the department a Green Achievement Award for its work in helping to train inmates in solar installation. And then I think the next one is my last slide. Yes, it's the contact us slide. My name, my Director of Communication and Outreach, Erin Fisher. And then we have our website, and then we have several social media platforms on which you can find us. I would love to put you on our mailing list. I would love to see more activity in areas like Zanesville. And we'd be happy to come and do a program to show the film once we can show films again, or to put together some other virtual opportunity for the people in that area. So just let me know, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was so helpful. I learned so much from that. Yeah, definitely. We would love to welcome you here in Zanesville when it's safe to do so. So I'm going to say bye-bye. Thank you so much. I'll give you a little round of applause, too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you to everyone who's still with us. I'm going to call up our last panelist, my friend Fidel. Fidel, are you still there?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for sticking around. We are a bit over time, but we have plenty of time to speak to you. So, would you like to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Absolutely. Thank you for hosting this town hall. It's been wonderful so far. So my name is Fadl Kaboub. I teach economics at Denison University here in Granville, Ohio. And I'm the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, which is a public policy think tank. We do a lot of work around sustainability and job creation and things like the Green New Deal. So what I wanted to talk about today is how do we pay for the Green New Deal? So we've heard a lot of great ideas and success stories at the local level here in Ohio and around the country. But the Green New Deal framework, the resolution that Kathy talked about earlier, is designed to be a national transformative public policy program. So it's to be designed and introduced at the federal level, but the projects are to be selected and implemented at the local level. And it's called the Green New Deal. There's a reference there to the New Deal of the 1930s during the Great Depression. And the New Deal of the 1930s was designed to transform the economic infrastructure of the United States, which broke down during the Great Depression. In a similar way, the Green New Deal today is not simply about climate change. Climate change is a central feature of it. Obviously, one of the goals is to decarbonize the economy. But the second feature of it is similar to the 1930s, which is to restructure the US economy and address economic inequality and socioeconomic exclusion. So those are two fundamental starting points. And here we hear a lot of people saying, well, it's going to be too expensive. We can't afford it. We don't have any money to do this. And I want to remind people of some of the most expensive things that the United States has done in the past and how we paid for them, to demonstrate that paying for things at the federal level is very different than paying for things at the state or city level. So at the city level, at the state level, we have to tax in order to pay for things. Or we can borrow up to a certain limit, but we don't have unlimited borrowing capacity. At the federal level, the financing mechanism is very, very different. So for example, World War II, which was the most expensive federal government program in the history of this country. Remember that it came right after the Great Depression, the most miserable time in US history. There was no money to be taxed. There was no money to be borrowed. And then we go from that most miserable economic depression to paying for World War II, the most expensive program. Where did the money come from? We didn't tax anybody before the war. We didn't borrow from anybody before the war. The federal government used the power of the purse, which Congress has. So this is not for you and I. This is not for cities or municipalities or states. This is only the power of the purse of the federal government. So the government sets the priorities. In this case, it was winning World War II. And notice that winning World War II was not incremental. It was not about sending 10,000 troops to scare them away. It was massive, bold intervention that required huge commitment and mobilization of resources. So where did the money come from? It's the federal government, 535 people, elected officials in Washington, D.C., who set the priorities, vote to approve the funding, and money is created into existence to pay for things. The concern during World War II, and the same concern we should have today for paying for the Green New Deal, is not where to find the money. We know where to find the money. It's 535 people vote and approve it. It's about once we start spending the money, hiring millions of people to build the green infrastructure, decarbonize the economy, and so on. The question is, what will the impact of that spending be? And the risk is always the risk of inflation. When we have too much money and people going on a shopping spree, that will have too much demand for cars, or too much demand for housing, or too much demand for electronics. So whatever it is that people want to buy with their money. The question is, do we actually have the productive capacity to build more homes, to build more cars, to build more of the stuff that people want? And if the answer is yes, we have plenty of productive capacity, then there will be no risk of inflation, right? But if the answer is no, we don't have enough engineers or technicians or skilled workers or technology to do this, then we run the risk of inflation. So this is what happened during World War II. We started spending massively on the war effort, and we were concerned that people are going to go on a shopping spree buying cars and buying homes that don't actually exist. So we were facing the risk of inflation. So what did the federal government do? We started selling things called the freedom bonds, or capitalizing on the patriotic mood of the nation during World War II, which essentially told those workers who are now building for the war effort, please postpone your spending. Don't buy that car. Don't buy that house, because that's going to cause inflation and hurt the country. Buy this freedom bond from the US Treasury. Give us $10,000. We promise to pay you back after the war plus interest. So that helped us postpone a lot of that spending during the war. And that also helped with the post-war boom, with all of the returning veterans now and all the savers, people who saved money during the war, are now going on a shopping spree, building homes and buying cars and so on. And at that point, we had enough productive capacity to do that because we didn't have a war to fight. So what I'm describing here is how the federal government always spends. We spend money into existence first. We worry about the inflation risk. Notice what happened a few months ago when we faced this pandemic and Congress voted and approved the CARES Act, trillions of dollars worth of spending. Notice a few weeks before the CARES Act, everybody in Washington, D.C. was saying, we have no money for the Green New Deal. We have no money for Medicare for all. We're broke and there's no way we can spend. And then all of a sudden, 535 people meet in DC and they decide the priority is the CARES Act and they vote to approve it, and checks were sent to everybody. What makes it even more interesting, the CARES Act situation, is that at the same time, this was around April 15th, which is the deadline when you're supposed to pay your taxes. The federal government says, forget about April 15th. Don't send us any money. We don't actually need it. They postponed the deadline for sending your tax payment. So notice the federal government doesn't need your tax revenues to pay for things. So everybody in DC understands this. The question is, what are the priorities that they set? You know, when we faced the pandemic, they said the priority is the CARES Act. When we faced World War II, that was the priority. And we didn't ask questions, where does the money come from? But it happens to be that during, quote unquote, normal economic times, the priorities are always the tax cut or the military budget or whatever corporations decide is of advantage to them. And when it comes to the Green New Deal or universal health care, things that matter to the average person, then they say, oh, we don't have the money. We have to tax somebody or borrow from somebody. So this analysis that I'm presenting here is called modern monetary theory, or MMT. You've probably heard about it in the news, and there's a lot of debates about it. So what this MMT framework tells us is that the federal government, unlike state and local, doesn't need tax revenues first in order to spend. So what we do is we decouple the spending from taxing. Both are important, but the federal government doesn't need to tax this in order to pay for that dollar for dollar. So once we decouple.
Okay, so we're live again. Some of you might just be now tuning in. The audio cut out, so we just restarted the live stream. I believe, Fidel, that the last comment was around trying to figure out when the audio cut out. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, let me just try to wrap up and then maybe open it up for questions. So the main point that maybe some people missed in the last portion where we lost the audio is that the federal government, unlike state and local government, is not limited by tax revenues or borrowing capacity, but it has much more spending capacity, and that spending capacity is not unlimited. And what limits it is the risk of inflation. So to close this, what I'm trying to say here is that risk of inflation is determined by two things. One of which I discussed, which is the productive capacity. The good news is that if we have a shortage of productive capacity, we can always produce more. We can train people, we can build more capacity, and it creates millions of jobs. The second risk of inflation is much more complicated than that, and it has to do with power and corruption in the system. By which I mean, we have key players in the economy who can raise prices because they can, or because we let them. So think of pharmaceutical industry, think of health insurance companies, think of big real estate companies, Wall Street companies, and so on. They have too much market power. They can raise prices and cause inflation simply because they can. So if we introduce a Green New Deal that says we're going to spend a lot on all of these great things without tackling the power and influence of the health insurance industry, of the healthcare industry, of pharmaceuticals, of Wall Street, then we're going to be running against that risk of inflation from a source that can't be eliminated by spending more or spending less. The only way you reduce their price-setting behavior, abusive price-setting behavior, is by taxing and regulating their market power out of existence, which means the 535 people we have in DC have to do the work of taxing and regulating those entities. Well, guess what? When you have elected officials who are brought to you by the super PACs, by pharmaceutical contributions and so on, they have no incentive to bite the hand that feeds them, which is why we have this movement of progressive candidates like you across the country, running for federal office, running for state office, who are saying no money in politics, who are saying we need to rein in the power of corporations. We need to bring back the democratic process, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, not a government of the super PAC, by the super PACs, for the super PACs. And a lot of people saw the news today, which is very relevant to what we're discussing today. When you have a dying industry, the fossil fuel industry, that can't compete with solar, can't compete with wind, can't compete with clean jobs, they had to be bailed out, and they had to bribe political officials here in the state of Ohio at the tune of $60 million, apparently, to get HB6 passed to bail them out and to slow down the rise of the clean and green industries.
Right.
And to add one final comment to what's been said earlier, it turns out even during recessions, during this crisis, green jobs are more resilient in the sense that, yes, everybody took a hit in terms of losing jobs, but green jobs tended to be more resilient during this crisis and previous crises, by the way, and they tend to pay better, than any other industry, the fossil fuel industries and so on. So this myth that we can't afford green jobs, that we can't afford the Green New Deal, is exactly what I called it, a myth. So when people say all of this sounds too expensive, we can't afford it, our answer should be, and this is where we should change the narrative about this, is that the status quo is actually too expensive.
Absolutely.
Not going to a Green New Deal is unaffordable. And let me illustrate by one example. We have choices to make at the local level, right? So we can either invest in clean energy, clean water, clean soil, and so on, or say, no, we can't afford it, that's too expensive, let's stick with the status quo, and then pay for cancer treatment for everybody in town for the next 30 years, as if that's affordable, right? In terms of financial cost, emotional pain to families and communities. So we have to shift the narrative about what's possible and what's actually affordable. And once we do that, it turns out that all the things that we talk about in the Green New Deal is actually the more common sense, the cheaper, the more obvious choice to make. But we're fighting against vested interests, the fossil fuel industry, political establishment forces, to be honest, on both parts of the aisle across the country, who sell this narrative that we need those jobs. We need the fracking jobs to fund the schools. Well, we need to call their bluff, because the data, the evidence is there that clean jobs and clean energy is on purely economic competitive grounds better, more efficient, more democratic, more transparent than all of the fossil fuel driven economic system that we've had for a long time that's outdated.
Yeah, and you brought up House Bill 6, and I mean, aside what happened in the news today, we knew before this news broke that it was a bad bill. We knew the sheer amount of money that went into that bill. We knew that before we found out it was related to bribery and racketeering.
Absolutely.
So this push to bail out coal plants, bail out nuke plants, it's not in favor of the people. And Jane with Green Energy Ohio brought up a good point, that she said she doesn't understand why legislators can say that they're representing their people if they're not advocating for green energy jobs, because they're so popular. And the answer why they're not in favor of it is money, because they're still getting their wallets filled by the coal industry. And just like kind of a common theme tonight is we have to elect candidates who will say no to that, because like people like me, we don't want that money. That's not of the people.
Right, exactly. And one important point to add here, that the fossil fuel industry, pushing back against the Green New Deal, they say, oh, we want to protect jobs for coal miners and so on. One of the key features of the Green New Deal is the concept of a just transition, which means we're not going to throw people under the bus. That's why the Green New Deal includes a job guarantee, which guarantees a just transition for all the workers who will lose their jobs in the decarbonization of the economy. A job guarantee with decent wages and benefits that guarantees that nobody's left behind. So this is one of the myths that you hear a lot about the Green New Deal, is that it's going to destroy livelihoods, which is not true at all.
Absolutely. Fidel, thank you so much. I think this was the perfect way to cap off this town hall. I know I learned a lot. I always learn a lot when I listen to you speak. So thank you for joining me today. We'll just kind of chat for a second. If anybody has any questions for Fidel or for me before we end this for the third and final time, just drop them in the comments. But yeah, absolutely. If you are interested in getting behind a candidate that is proudly going to say no to donations from the coal industry, donations from dark money, from corporate PACs, join my team. The link is above. I'll plug it again, swope2020.com/volunteer. We need your help to stand up to this power in this area and actually elect a representative that's of and for the people and for green energy, and who will fight to push that within the state of Ohio. Fidel, any final comments from you?
Well, I'd like to invite everybody to learn more about your campaign and to support you. But also, if you're not in the Zanesville area in your district, there's probably a candidate running in your community at the local or state level, candidates who really understand what's at stake, what the Green New Deal as the key platform to transform the American economy. And candidates who understand how to pay for it. There's literally dozens and dozens of candidates who are embracing the Green New Deal framework, the MMT framework that I explained today. So find those candidates, support them, and if there's no candidate in your district, then it's probably you or your friends who should be organizing a campaign and running for office.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you would have spoken to me over like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and told me I would be where I am today, I would say you're lying. So basically, if you are thinking about running, you should run. People will support you. We need more everyday people to run for office. And just kind of a final cap on all of this, we were talking about the Green New Deal, and the Green New Deal can happen at so many different levels in government, and it can happen outside of government too. So we kind of moved through that today, talking to Nathan and Vicky with Sunrise, and how we can push for a Green New Deal through direct action and activism and organizing. But that kind of goes hand in hand with electing people who will fight for this as well. But that can happen at your city level with your city council, kind of like what Vicky was talking about with Newcomers Town and the solar panels. It can happen in the state house with your state legislators, and it can sure as hell happen at the federal level with more funding. So this is really an all-encompassing kind of package that we need for our future. So I will leave all of you with that. Thank you so much for tuning in. This was quite the long town hall, and I really am honored by everyone who's still watching. So thank you for sticking with us with the technical difficulties. I promise we'll get that figured out before the next one. And everyone, enjoy your Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your week. Fidel, thank you so much again. You enjoy the rest of your night too.
Thanks. Bye.